Hi, thank you so much for clicking on our presentation at this year's CSRI conference. My name is Amanda Polikoba, and on behalf of myself and our research team, which consists of Dr. Sarah Stokowski, Dr. Chelsea Connart, and Dr. Allie Fridley, I want to welcome you to our presentation, A Final Goodbye, an examination of athletes' transition process following the cancellation of the NCAA basketball tournament. And so on March 12th of 2020, the NCAA made the decision to cancel the men's and women's basketball tournament over concerns about COVID-19. And the NCAA subsequently decided to grant an additional year of eligibility to spring sport athletes. However, they did not do the same for those participating in winter sports, which meant athletes that had additional eligibility remaining, perhaps their teams would make the tournament the following year. However, for those basketball athletes, the seniors, the graduate students in their final year of eligibility, their basketball careers came to a very sudden and unexpected end. So what we wanted to look at was understand how the cancellation of the March Madness tournament impacted the athletes. So we could, through a content analysis and using Schlossberg's model of analyzing human adaptation to transition, we examined how Division I basketball players in their last year of eligibility responded to the unexpected cancellation of the remainder of their season during conference tournament play due to the concerns over the pandemic. And the research question that guided our study was, how did NCAA Division I basketball collegiate athletes internalize and express their non-normative transition through Instagram posts? And so when you're looking at transition, the first thing that basically everyone needs to understand, and probably does understand, is that transition is unescapable. There's no way that you're going to be able to go through the same thing throughout your college career or even your life. And so that, added with the fact that most collegiate athletes are not going to play professional, they understand that they're going to move on from college athlete to former college athlete at some point in time, usually within 4 to 5 years. However, the ability for that athlete to adjust to the transition often depends on the circumstances that surround the transition, mostly whether it was normative or non-normative. So what a normative transition is when the transition is expected. You know that when your last game is supposed to be played, and that's it. You would then on that day move from college athlete to former college athlete. So you've exhausted all your eligibility, or you have made the decision to stop playing. Non-normative transitions are unanticipated, things like a career-ending injury or being cut from the team. And in this case, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the athletes that had their seasons suddenly canceled by the pandemic experienced a non-normative transition. So when we were using the Schlossberg model, it offers an understanding and regarding how different perceptions and characteristics can impact the different individuals regarding how they adapt to this transition. And there's 3 major factors that will affect the ability for the athlete to transition. The first one is the characteristics of that transition. So again, is it normative or non-normative? Did it happen in a way that the athlete viewed it as a positive or a negative? Was it seen as a gain or a loss? All of those will come into play. The second factor examines the characteristics of pre and post transition environments, which consists of social support, institutional support, resources made available. So when the pandemic hit and the tournament was canceled, on top of that, most of these athletes were then sent back home because campuses closed. And so not only were they processing the shock of not having the tournament and no longer being a collegiate athlete, but they didn't even have the people that they had been around them for 4 or 5 years to process it with, since they were all kind of sent to different parts of the country. And then the third factor looks at characteristics of the individual experiencing the transition and the influences on that individual's ability to transition. And some of these factors, according to Schlossberg, are age, sex, well-being, values, and previous experience of a similar nature can impact the transition. And so, being that no one had really experienced a pandemic or anything like this, that part was really not a factor in this study or how they were going to adapt because no one had been through a pandemic before. So, the method that we chose to use in this study was a content analysis of photographs that were posted on Instagram by the D1 basketball players to understand how they internalized and then wanted to express their feelings regarding the cancellation of the tournament and the pandemic. We chose Instagram because it's the platform that is most popular with the age demographic that is college students between 18 and 29 years old. And research has shown that college students spend more time on Instagram than any other social media platform. So again, we used the Division I men's and women's basketball top 25 teams according to the AP at the ranking immediately following the cancellation of the tournament. And these teams and athletes were chosen because even if their teams had lost in their conference tournaments, because of where they were ranked nationally, there was still the expectation that they were going to make the March Madness tournament for both men and women. So the athletes did not enter the conference tournaments thinking that this could be their last game. And that makes it even more non-normative, I guess, in nature, because it wasn't a we have to win or we're out. It was a, well, we want to win, but even if we don't, we're still going to make the tournament. So to collect this data, we recorded every senior or graduate student from the top 25 men's and women's basketball teams. We searched on Instagram and recorded all posts from the athletes regarding the tournament between March 12th, the day the tournament was canceled, and 1 week later, March 19th. Initially, we had 164 athletes that could potentially be a part of this study. However, 64 of those athletes had private Instagram accounts or did not post anything during this time frame. And 26 athletes did not have an Instagram account that could be located. And so in total, we had 264 photographs from 74 athletes from the top 25 men's and women's basketball teams. And once we had those individuals and their Instagram accounts, we collected, obviously, the photos from their public Instagram accounts, so their public access. The photographs were analyzed independently of the Instagram captions because, according to Smith and Sanderson, photographs and captions are not always correlated, and to code both together incorrectly assumes an automatic relatedness. So a witty caption could have nothing to do with the action in the photograph. And again, similar to the Smith and Sanderson 2015 study, any videos or graphics that were posted were also discarded from the analysis. Prior to coding of the data, we determined the set of labels or codes that we were going to use for the Instagram photos. And we did this by looking at previous research from Goffman, Hatton and Trotner, and then Kim and Sagas. And so each photograph was coded for the following 7 items. Is it a black and white photo or a color photo, a solo or a group photo, an in uniform or out of uniform picture, in-game photo or outside of game photo? Is it an in action or out of action picture? Was the face in view or a face not shown? And then finally, looking at a goodbye or finality image, which was basically like a waving to the crowd or walking off the court, something to that effect. So what we found are that both male and female athletes primarily posted color photos. There were very few black and white images that they posted. Majority, both for female and male athletes, were group photos. It was about 66% for female athletes posting group photos versus solo. And then male, it was about twice the amount almost. So you saw definitely a good sense of teammates and camaraderie and this group feeling of these images. And when we looked at the in uniform versus out of uniform, both the male and female athletes posted many more in uniform pictures than they did out of uniform. In terms of the in-game, like on the court action photos, 49 to 43 for the males. So it was almost 50-50 in terms of looking at photos that they had pictures of that were on the court, majority, some of them in action type of things, versus hanging out in the locker room or in a meeting room. For the women, on the other hand, the female athletes, 103 were in-game photos and 51 were outside of the game. So you almost like a 2-to-1 ratio there. And then looking at in action versus out of action, most of the photos were out of action in terms of they weren't like taken of the athlete in the actual game. They were maybe posing on the court or on the bench talking to someone or talking to a coach, but they weren't, in the midst of taking a shot or passing the ball or some kind of in-game action element. And then looking at the face, whether it was in view or not shown, most of the photos were so you could see the athlete and their face. A few chose to post pictures that were of them from behind, or some of them, which relates to the next category of the finality goodbye image, walking off the court, which looked like kind of for that last time where you saw people in the crowd and that athlete heading down the tunnel toward the locker room, which then goes to the goodbye finality image. 47 images by male athletes and only 17 from female athletes showed this element. They were all kind of a mix of different things. And then what all this means is for most athletes, obviously the transition is permanent. And since they're not going to be playing at the professional level, their career-ending injury, this transition could be likened to a career-ending injury because it happened in an instant and there was no way for them to prepare for it. And the permanent nature of this transition could be seen in 64 images, which is about a quarter of the sample that we had, which elucidated a goodbye or finality feeling, that waving to the crowd, that sense of, kind of tears in their eyes, the crowd cheering. You could see that was probably happening in these photos that they were posting. And considering most of the posts were sport related, it can be inferred that the sample viewed this transition as a loss and utilized Instagram as an outlet for this self-expression, which is similar to other studies that have looked at images and transition process, granted not with a pandemic or anything like that. The images were not reflective of the athlete looking towards the future. They were not pictures of like a diploma coming up or cap and gown or anything like that. It was this time in the past now because that's what had happened. And the social and institutional support plays a large role at how these athletes are going to adapt to an event like this. Although the group images were very common among this sample, previous research has demonstrated that athletes often lose their support system, which is their teammates and their coaches, and experience loneliness upon sport retirement. And you could probably envision that this was happening with these athletes as well because they couldn't process this transition together on campus. They were sent home to wherever that location may be across the country to kind of wait out and see what was going to happen with this pandemic. And as the days and weeks went on, it became very clear that they were potentially never going to step foot on their campus again. And so the transition brought on by COVID-19 may have increased feelings of isolation for these athletes due to the stay-at-home orders or self-quarantining efforts and the social distancing requirements that many states had put into place to try and keep their residents safe. So it can be assumed that COVID-19 and the sudden departure from campus for these athletes further hindered the institutional efforts to assist athletes in transitioning to a life beyond sport, because even if they had this great programming in place that was going to take place, further on in either March or April or May, the athletes were unable to take part of that, and not everybody was able to switch from an in-person to an online virtual kind of learning and meeting style as quickly. So they were perhaps never given this opportunity to kind of continue on with the programming in hopes of figuring out what their life post college was going to look like. And so individual characteristics, like I spoke about earlier, such as age, sex, well-being, values, can also impact that athlete's ability to adapt. Majority of the athletes in the study just a little over 79% of male athletes and 90% of female athletes posted pictures wearing their basketball uniform. So this is clearly central to their identity, and the fact that they will no longer be donning that uniform seemed to be hitting them quite hard. So not only do these posts depict what athletes value, which is their sport, but also how they view themselves. So they view themselves as an athlete. There were not pictures of them at a desk in a classroom. So they did not seem to be mourning the element of, I'm no longer going to be a college student on this campus, but I'm no longer going to be an athlete, a basketball player on this campus. And so the sheer volume of the posts in the present study of athletes wearing their uniforms and or participating in a basketball game shows evidence of a high athlete identity. And we know from multiple studies that athletes with a high athlete identity often face difficulty adapting to life beyond sport. And it's even harder when there's a non-normative transition because they have not spent time diversifying who they are or their interests. They have put all of their focus into this athlete piece. And so that now being stripped away in a manner that was completely out of their control makes it even harder to kind of go on and figure out what that next phase is going to be. And so the practical implications from this, one is there's a need to increase social media literacy through social media training, because social media can be a really useful tool for the self-presentation and brand management, but it's also a therapeutic outlet, which was seen in this study. Athletes were not able to say goodbye to their fans or maybe their teammates or coaches in the manner that they really wanted. So they were able to say goodbye via Instagram. And being able to do this effectively and maybe in a way that's both helpful for the athlete and preserves what the university would like everybody to see is really important. And so looking at social media training and social media literacy is really important so they know how to do this in a professional manner. And then given the COVID-19 environment, athletes should be encouraged to utilize social media to connect and communicate with others, both on a personal and maybe a professional level, because these feelings of self-isolation are only going to make it harder for the athlete to transition to the next phase in life. And so if all you ever have known is to send a snap to your friend or post something on Instagram, how do you use these social networks and social media in a manner that can be helpful to you? And so training on that can be really helpful as well. And again, you can use it to promote the sense of community and interconnectedness and assist college athletes, not just on your own campus, but across the country with this COVID-induced non-normative transition that they were dealing with. And so if you have any questions about any part of the study, since you were unable to ask in person, as long as any of my co-authors I know would be happy to answer your questions. You can see all of our email and Twitter handles on here. So feel free to shoot us an email, send us a message on Twitter. We would love to hear from you. And if you have questions or comments or want us to explain anything further, we are happy to do so. So again, I want to thank you so much for being a part of our little presentation and for coming to the CSRI conference in a very unique manner. And we hope to see you all next year in South Carolina. Thank you. Bye.